Well, good morning. Welcome again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my roundup of motorcycle news, some riding tips, and some views on the world of motorcycling generally. Show number 613, and it is Sunday, the 16th of August. So, what have we got for you in today's show? Well, again, quite a packed show today. Motorcycle sales figures or registration figures in the UK are out, and Suzuki have sold more bikes in the first half of 2026 than they sold in the whole of 2025. We've got some more news on the Superbike Factory, which is in administration, and a question about who owns some of their stock. Warwickshire Police, they, for some reason, mothballed their off-road bike team. Darley Moor Circuit is up for sale. The IAM have taken their young riders on track at Thruxton circuit. We'll have a look at some UK and world news in brief before we move on to looking at some motorcycle news. Ducati's Monster has won a Red Dot Design Award. I have talked about this design award in the past, actually. Rudge are back, at least in name. Maeving are getting £3 million in government-backed export funding. I noticed my show notes actually said £3 in funding, rather more than that. And finally, in depth today, we'll actually ask a really quite an interesting question. It's how do you actually measure danger? Is it what could go wrong or what actually does go wrong or the outcome when things go wrong? There's actually several different ways of thinking about danger. Anyway, that's all at the end of the show. So stay with me for the next 40 odd minutes as I run through all those various stories. Now, where are we going to start today? Well, every year, the DFT, the Department for Transport here in the UK, they announce the latest road casualty figures for Great Britain. Northern Ireland has its own reporting system, and 2025's came out at the end of last month. And every year, of course, the numbers of motorcyclists who are killed and injured is kind of used as the basis for a renewed effort to improve rider safety. But the question I'm asking today is how accurate actually are these statistics? Now, a few shows back, I talked about the case of a rider who sadly managed to kill himself by riding into a goalpost whilst testing his new off-road bike in the dark. To my surprise, the coroner actually recorded this death as a road traffic collision, and clearly it was nothing of the sort. The collision didn't take place on a road at all. Now, I've also talked about how the stats for unregistered electric motorcycles, the sort of Surons, bikes like that, are also being lumped in with legal motorcycles. Now, the latest admission from the DFT is a fairly shocking one, actually. It turns out that they don't have a reporting category for illegal electric pedal cycles either. There are no reporting guidelines even, and it says, they say, unfortunately, these vehicles cannot currently be identified in the statistics. And they say they might be classed as electric motorcycles, but it can vary by force and by reporting officer. So in other words, there is no consistency in how the police are told to report these things. Seriously, how long does it take to update a reporting form? Now, as far as I know, no one has actually ever counted how many illegal e-bikes are actually in use. And perhaps the best indicator is that legal 50cc sales, the sort of the mopeds which these bikes actually compete with, they've fallen by more than 40% since 2022, when the illegal e-bike sales and conversion kits for bicycles started to become increasingly common. So what with illegal electric motorcycles and illegal e-bikes that may or may not be recorded as motorcycles, how accurate are the shock horror claims that have been floating around this spring and summer about a 13% increase in motorcycle deaths last year? Now, if that's one example of government inertia, here is another. Last week, I featured a new study that showed that e-scooter use was more dangerous than motorcycling. Now, the latest update to this particular story is that 477 children across England suffered e-scooter injuries between January 2019 and December 2024. Now, the average age for these children was 12. Head trauma occurred in nearly a quarter of all cases, and fewer than 2% were wearing helmets at the time of the accident. Now, 80% of the cases were recorded as involving privately owned e-scooters, which it could imply that the remaining 20% occurred when these young kids were actually using illegally ridden rental e-scooters. So, with that in mind, it was no real surprise that the Newport MP, Jessica Morden, she has called for improved e-scooter regulation last week. Now, by coincidence, my buddy Malk, former instructor, he linked me to a Beeb story on e-scooters about Paris. Now, this is aimed at reducing casualties, deaths. The report said in e-scooter accidents almost doubled to 79 last year, although it's not entirely clear whether that's Paris or the whole of France. But it is now mandatory for riders of e-scooters, and if you're weird enough, electric unicycles and hoverboards too, to wear approved helmets and high-vis on public roads. And there are fines waiting for you if you don't. €135 for a helmetless rider and 35 for not wearing the high-vis. Now, with the instance of serious head injuries being so high, making helmets compulsory seems sensible enough. But high-vis clothing, it's done little to protect motorcyclists and cyclists from looked but failed to see collisions. And in any case, last week's data flagged up loss of control crashes, and high-vis certainly won't help there. Now, one question that wasn't raised is that while the UK bans private e-scooters, Paris did exactly the opposite. They legalized them whilst terminating the rental schemes. The question nobody seems to be asking is, how is it that two countries came up with such radically different answers to the same problem, and what are the comparative results? The second article led me to another BBC item which asked why the UK is actually dithering about what to do with e-scooters. Now, the rental experiment started in July 2020, you may recall, in the middle of COVID, and originally it was supposed to run till November 2021 to gather data. It was then extended and extended again, and I believe extended a third time. So we've now got 8 years or so of data gathering. Sorry, that's 6 years of data gathering. Now, the official explanation is that the extended trials are filling evidence gaps, but we do have to ask, at what point do we run out of additional information? What are we actually expecting to discover? Now, the UK isn't experimenting with a uniquely British technology here, and e-scooters are in use across Europe and around the world. So surely evidence for their use can be pooled. Now, at some point, the decision has to be made, but the UK is repeatedly pushing that down the road. The question is why? Is it commercial pressure from the rental operators who actually have a commercial interest in maintaining their exclusive access to the market? Call me a cynic, but maybe the problem is not the data collection per se, but it's the fact that the data collection hasn't yet given us the answer that fitted the system the UK government wanted to build. If you want to find the BBC articles, I'll just pop the links up to them now. So hang on a minute, just find the right button. There we go. Those are the two BBC links. Right, okay, so moving on rapidly then, it's time for a look at the weather forecast. Now, I never thought I'd say it, but I'm actually looking forward to the prospect of some rain this week. We've had around 2 months without a drop falling on the garden, and it's suffering. This week does finally start to show some changes, and we are looking at a significant drop in temperature across the week as the 5th heat wave of the summer fizzled out yesterday. Now, today will stay largely largely cloudy in the northern half of the UK. A weak weather front will bring some light patchy rain to spots, though. Cloud and a few spots of light rain will clear to sunny spells further south, where temperatures will peak at around 25 Celsius. Monday sees another band of rain gradually sweeping in from the west across the north of the UK. It will be heavy in places during the afternoon. Now, it'll be mainly cloudy further south, just the possibility of a few showers, but the odd sunny spell will develop too, and temperatures by the end of the day will again be mid-20s. Now, beyond that, the picture gets increasingly uncertain. There's a front looking likely to bring some rain across Wales and the Midlands on Tuesday, but it may not bring rain to the south and southeast as it moves across the UK. Further north, there will likely be rain with sunny breaks. Now, Wednesday looks likely to see any rain that did fall clearing the southeast, and it will leave sunny spells for most behind it. Showers, heavier spells of rain again in the north and the west. Now, on Thursday, more variable cloud is expected. There could be some showers, some longer spells of rain, but again, this rain could miss the south and east entirely. Temperatures will be high teens across the north for most of the week, and dropping back as the week goes on into the low 20s in the south and the east, and it will feel much, much cooler and rather more pleasant, dare I say it. Right, okay, so let's move on with some news, and the first story is the one that the UK motorcycle market is recovering over sales figures from 2025. But, you know, the question still remains, are we seeing genuine renewed demand for motorcycles, a bounce back, which has probably had some help from the weather, or is it the continued recovery from the distorted 2025 market? I mean, it's still hard to say, but figures do have some distance to go to get back to where they were just a few years ago. One interesting observation, though, Suzuki sales are up 62% in the first part of 2026 compared to 2025, and the Japanese manufacturer has already sold more units in 2026 here in the UK than it did during the entire 12 months of 2025. Now, it won't be unconnected with their significant price reductions, which have taken place over 70% of their range, but it also will be a consequence of them actually putting some more models in showrooms. I remember I ran an article not that long ago, which actually wondered whether Suzuki were in fact intending to pull out of the sort of premium motorcycle market altogether, because I think they only had something like about 3 models on sale in the UK. Right, okay, on to some less good news, and all that will be of no comfort to anybody caught up in the collapse of Superbike Factory. Now, you may recall that We Buy Any Bike is actually a trading name of Superbike Factory Group Limited and of the Superbike Factory Limited. And it seems that We Buy Any Bike, they were actually still buying bikes on behalf of SBF immediately before the group went into administration. And so what happened was some of those bikes were apparently trailered away, but the payments against those machines were never made. Now let's have a quick look at this. This is the notice which has been put out on the We Buy Any Bike website, which I visited this morning. It's still up there. Now, at least one seller was told that the payment system was temporarily down, and they were told that the payment would be made within a few days after. I won't report the entire article. You can find it on the Vicedown website if you want to go looking for it. Briefly, what happened was Mark handed over his Ducati Street Fighter 848. It was valued at £5,200, which seems a bit low on to me, but anyway, what do I know? On the 10th of July, he was assured that payment would follow within a few days. It couldn't be made immediately because of the system failure, but the money failed to arrive. Now, he tried to get through on the phone and found that the lines just were on presumably on an answer phone. So when he couldn't do that, he eventually jumped in the car and he drove to his Castle Donington showroom, where he actually found his Ducati on the showroom floor with a for sale notice stuck to it. Now, after about 45 minutes of discussion about ownership of the bike, where he argued that the failure to pay him negated the sale, the staff apparently returned the bike with the keys and the various paperwork, although the paperwork had apparently been filled in to change the ownership. Anyway, in short, he took the bike home and he did an HPI check on it, and he discovered that something called stock finance had been registered against this Ducati by a company called DF Capital. Now, DF Capital turned out to be one of the major creditors of Superbike Factory, and what they do is they provide businesses like SBF with basically with a loan against the bikes on their showroom floor. So the loan is secured on the bike. The loan helps create operating capital for the company to continue sort of in business. Now, DF Capital has since removed the finance against that particular Ducati, but Mark says he considers himself extremely lucky. Apparently, just a few hours later, the shutters came down at the store and the bike might have become another disputed item in the administration of the show. Now, let me just put up the link to that story for you. That's going up on screen now. Right, okay, so what's the next story then? Well, the next one I have for you is a rather interesting one, because this is about Warwickshire Police. Now, I'm pretty sure I covered this story, but they very proudly announced that they were getting hold of some off-road bikes to help tackle rural crime. But now they've paused their use, and it's said to be over financial considerations, and the force is now considering whether to continue using them, to replace them with something else, or to abandon the bikes altogether. Now, their rural crime team, it was established in October 2019, and it was May 2021 that when the force explicitly announced that 2 rural crime officers had been trained and equipped as part of its dual purpose bike team. Now, at the time, it was described as one of a few such specialist teams in the UK, and it was intended to tackle antisocial behaviour using off-road motorcycles, quad bikes and 4x4s, all that kind of thing. And the announcement said the bikes would be used alongside drones, thermal imaging and night vision. Now, Warwickshire Police, they're claiming that they never actually used the bikes for any pursuits. And they say they were handled by appropriately trained officers using other vehicles, which rather begs the question, what was the training that the dual purpose bike team actually got? Rather more alarmingly, the police also say they have no statistical evidence the off-road bikes had a marked impact on the detection of or prevention of crime. Now, I'd say that's not the only measure of effectiveness. You know, they might well have helped locals at least think the police were doing something. You know, residents don't see statistics patrolling the streets. Do you need a racetrack? Darley Moor is up for sale. The 168-acre site is still operating as a track, but it's described by Savills as an income-producing property, but the sales particulars emphasise it's got some long-term development property. The site has apparently been considered in the emerging Derbyshire Dales local plan in a district which has, you probably guessed by now, a shortfall in housing land. Now, there is no planning permission for redevelopment right now. Racing is continuing, but in the provisions for the sale, there is apparently a clause that would allow the current owner of the land to share in any future value created by redevelopment. So you can see where that one's going. Talking of race circuits, IAM Road Smart, in association with DocBike, took 40 young riders aged 17 to 26 to Thruxton on the 6th of August for what was described as a fully funded Skills for the Road Day. IAM Road Smart says the purpose was to build confidence, awareness and good decision-making skills early in a rider's career, and the day covered vehicle handling, hazard awareness, road positioning, observation, vehicle maintenance, plus life-saving training. Now, it is good to see money being spent on young riders rather than simply rolling out the old be careful line. The cash came from £25,000 raised through the IAM's Big Give Christmas Challenge. But I really would like to see some evidence that training on a track actually translates to better on-road riding. The IAM says that 1,700 riders under 25 were killed or seriously injured last year, and that DFT data shows that around 1 in 10 motorcycle collisions involve an inexperienced rider. But as I've said before, programs aimed at improving braking and swerving skills are simply addressing the problem riders find themselves in after things have already gone wrong, and building confidence on a track with no real hazards. Well, not entirely no real hazards. I noticed a British Superbike rider was injured in a crash yesterday at the same circuit. But building confidence might not be the best goal. As I said before, getting people to ask questions and realize how things can go wrong might be more valuable. Right, back in a second. As always, can I ask you to take a moment to like and subscribe to this show if you've not already done so? Every click helps other motorcyclists discover my content, or simply share the word the old-fashioned way by telling your riding buddies about Elevenses. They can watch on catch-up. Remember, my latest riding skills articles are always free, and you can get all the links delivered weekly to your email inbox by subscribing to my newsletter at survivalskills.substack.com. Or you can use this QR code to jump straight to it, when the show's over of course. No spam, and if you don't like the content, unsubscribe at any time. Right. Okay, so on with some UK and world news in brief. Now, last week, social media posts falsely claimed a motorcyclist being airlifted to hospital had died. This week, it's a story that new road safety proposals would require all drivers over 70 to retake driving tests. Absolutely no truth in that. The actual proposals are for drivers aged 70 to undergo mandatory eyesight checks every 3 years when they renew their licence, replacing the current self-declaration. But this is still a proposal, and at the same time ministers are considering a minimum 3-month learning period between theory and practical tests for drivers. How they enforce that, I have no idea, but drivers under 25 were involved in 24% of fatal and serious collisions in 2024. Now, sadly, a 47-year-old rider in Shropshire was killed when a pheasant flew into his motorcycle, apparently knocking him unconscious before he collided with a road sign. It's a tragic reminder that pheasants are surprisingly substantial birds. Now, DFT data shows that 69% of motorcycle fatalities occur on rural roads, and encounters with wildlife do happen, but that's the sort of hazards that I can't see how track training can help you for. Sri Lanka, they're expanding the country's 1990 Suwa emergency ambulance service by using motorcycles. And the idea is fairly straightforward. In congested urban areas, motorcycle responders can reach a seriously injured or ill person ahead of an ambulance in heavy traffic. The first hour is described as the golden hour, and that's when this rapid medical intervention can make a difference. Now, out in New Zealand, police have accepted a watchdog finding that an officer was not justified in pursuing motorcyclist Levi Proctor at high speed before he crashed into a lamppost and died on an Auckland motorway in July 2023. Now, the pursuit apparently lasted for 10.8 kilometres on state highways 16 and 18. The average speed was 162 kilometres per hour, and speeds at times exceeded 190 kph. The officer was acquitted of a charge of dangerous driving causing death, but in April last year, he was convicted of driving a motor vehicle in a dangerous manner. Disqualified for 6 months, he resigned from the police in April this year. The Independent Police Conduct Authority report has now been released. It found that the motorcycle officer's risk assessment was fundamentally flawed. His actions breached police policy and they materially contributed to the fatal crash. In a statement released following that report, they acknowledged and accepted the findings. Now, in Pennsylvania last week, police tried to stop a 22-year-old rider, Luis Antonio Cruz Hernandez, for a traffic violation. Now, he apparently fled, and that pursuit also ended when his motorcycle collided, this time with an SUV. He also died at the scene. And it does raise the same question as the New Zealand case. You know, when somebody commits a relatively minor traffic offence, at what point does pursuing them create a greater risk for everybody else, let alone the individuals involved, rather than letting them go and dealing with them later? You might not be able to track a sort of stolen or unregistered bike, but you know, quite often you can. Right, okay, another quick break before we get on to the motorcycle news. If you enjoy these shows, why not become a member of my Ko-fi pages? Just follow the QR code and sign up. As a member, you get free access to the latest articles and the Survival Schools ebook shop with instant downloads of everything from free mini ebooks to ebook versions of my paperbacks. Become a one-off supporter and you'll open up the archive of over 1,000 articles. If you buy me a monthly cuppa as a subscriber, there's even more content to enjoy. Right, okay, so on some bike news then. Well, Ducati's new monster has won a Red Dot Design Award. The award, at least as described by Red Dot themselves, is for a prestigious international competition that recognises excellence in product design, brand communication and design concepts. Well, the revised monster has the new V2 engine. It's got sophisticated electronics, and the engineering makes it lighter than the previous model. But what's actually new here? Well, Ducati's biggest design achievement may actually be that they've managed to change the bike without actually looking like they've changed very much. And, you know, that's fine. But I often wonder what we're supposed to take away from these awards. You know, things making expensive things look desirable is the criterion. Ducati probably had a head start there. Now, Rudge, a blast from the past, they are back, at least in name. A new company is explicitly positioning Rudge as a premium British motorcycle marque, drawing heavily on heritage, royal connections and historic racing reputation. Its website says it intends to build British motorcycles combining craftsmanship with modern performance. So what do we know about these bikes? Well, this is about it, really. Let me give you a zoom in view. As you'll see, these are some carefully blurred out graphics. It's a Rudge 344. Now, this is named after the Scuderia Ferrari motorcycle race team that used Rudge motorcycles from 1932 to 1934. They accumulated 3 national titles and 44 victories. And it pretty much hides any engine details. It does look like a single cylinder, and there is a radiator visible if you look carefully too. Anything else? Well, not quite sure what the rear end of the bike is. It's a sort of a soft tail, possibly single sprung seat by the look of it as well. So it's sort of very 1930s sort of styling. Anyway, who is behind the relaunch? Well, the shiny new Rudge website says it's Jacob Rudge, who is a member apparently of the original Rudge family, and he's bringing it back. A new company called Rudge Cycles Limited that was incorporated in April 2025. Jacob Rudge is the sole director, but here's where it gets tricky, because it seems another company called Rudge Motorcycles Limited, Rudge Cycles Limited versus Rudge Motorcycles Limited, also exists under different ownership. So it may well be that some kind of intellectual property or trademark fight might be on the cards, unless they can differentiate themselves sufficiently. Anyway, it does tell us something about the potential value of dormant motorcycle brands. It may be in this age of global manufacturing that the old British sort of logo on the tank might be the most important part of that. Anyway, right now, how far is the company along towards manufacturing the bike? Not very far at all. They're looking for pre-seed investment to fund the first prototype, which means they haven't actually got a prototype yet, which means this is less Rudge returns and more, could we have some money, please? Now, rather more substantively, the Coventry-based Maeving outfit has actually secured 3 million of government-backed export finance to help it increase production and sell more bikes overseas. So in case you're wondering, this isn't simply a handout. This is backing a trade finance facility from HSBC. So essentially, this is cash to help Maeving fund production whilst it actually waits to be paid by customers. And this really helps the company solve this sort of all too frequent problem of finding enough working capital to move from small scale, more or less hand-built production to volume production runs. And that's a hurdle that's brought down a number of e-bike startups, including, you may remember, Xperia, the Italian manufacturer, who actually collapsed with a full order book from French police for electric motorcycles. And maybe it's an indication that Maeving are actually solving a problem by building machines that people actually want to order. I don't think I like their looks particularly. I think they're a bit weird looking, but who knows? What do I know? Obviously, if they're selling, they're all doing well. Right, okay, not much news about motorcycles, so that really is it today. But we're going to move on to the in-depth item then. And this is the question of how do you measure danger? What could go wrong, what does go wrong, or the outcome when it all goes wrong? And this is in response to a video that popped up from the Auto Shenanigans channel that claimed, and I quote, "England's most dangerous road isn't what you think." I couldn't resist the clickbait title, I'm afraid, but I sat down with a cuppa and I watched the video through. But I kind of asked myself that simple question, about what danger actually is before I got going. Now, you may have seen one of my recent articles where I discussed the 3 speeds of any particular road. I discussed the fact there was a geometric limit that's actually imposed by the sort of shape of the road and the performance of the vehicle and whether it can physically get around a bend. There's the posted limit set by authorities, and there is also a perceived limit that seems appropriate to the rider or driver. And the perceived limit is the one that matters because drivers instinctively change their behavior depending on whether the speed limit matches the road or seems inappropriate, and on whether the risk itself, the geometric limit, is actually obvious or well concealed. So if you want to read it, I'll give you the link to go and have a look and discover what I said about the 3 speeds of a road. And anyway, back to the video. So I watched it, and the first thing that came through was that the video explicitly settled on fatalities as the definition of danger. And then the presenter ran through a selection of roads, and that simple question was asked over and over: how many fatalities were there on this road? And the conclusion that was drawn was, if nobody died, a road isn't really dangerous. Now, that's a legitimate measure of observed harm, but it isn't a definition of danger. So, as I said, danger in the sense of ordinary language is potential for harm. And crucially, that potential for harm can exist whether or not the harm has or hasn't occurred. So have a quick look at this particular stretch of road. I will zoom in on that so you can see it a little bit more clearly. There it is. Lovely piece of road. I don't know if you've ridden this one. But this is Hard Knot Pass, and this is in the Lake District. Now, it's clearly a highly technical road, but the video conclusion was that this road isn't actually dangerous because fatalities on the road are rare. Now, it doesn't prove the road isn't dangerous. The hazards are pretty obvious to anybody who has ever ridden it. You can see most of them in the picture here. There are steep gradients, there are exposed drops, There are sharp hairpins. There is poor visibility with restricted sight lines. And, frankly, get something wrong on this road and the outcome is likely to be serious. And that's not even mentioning, of course, the very changeable and notorious Lake District weather. Now, so again, what it tells us is something rather more interesting about the relationship between the road and the rider or driver and their behavior. Put a rider on hard not pass, ask them what the hazards are, and they'll tell you easily. Same as you looking at this photo, you can see easily what those problems are. And behavior on the road will mirror that because the environment itself is telling the brain, this is demanding, slow down, increase your attention level and take care. So in other words, the apparent danger modifies behavior. Remember that sort of perceptual speed limit I talked about a moment ago. So welcome to a related concept, the perceptual road. Now, hazards like this are screaming at you on this kind of road, but it's not the case for all roads. Now, the video actually got close to this about 5 minutes in when the presenter starts talking about the higher number of fatalities along the A6. The presenter, in fact, said that it's a often straight, apparently ordinary A road. It's got wide lanes, it's got gentle corners with reasonable sight lines. And they said the road looks benign, but it's actually dangerous because there are everything from concealed farm entrances where a tractor might be waiting to emerge, hidden junctions, deer crossing the road, or a driver simply using the apparently open road and misjudging the speed of an oncoming vehicle in the middle of an overtake. So from the perceptual road perspective, the hazards aren't necessarily visible on this road, or not at least not visibly obvious. So the rider or driver may not modify their behavior in response. And that's the first problem then of the video's interpretation of danger. But there's another, and this is fairly obvious really when you think about it. It's the issue of doing a simple casualty count. What the video completely fails to mention is that the A6 is the fourth longest road in the country. It runs 299 miles, 481 kilometers if you prefer. It runs from Luton to Carlisle, and that makes it 100 times longer than Hard Knot Pass. Now, you really can't talk about danger on the road without discussing casualties per mile. And by this metric, the A6 isn't nearly so bad as the video implied. So failing to consider that minor factor skews the count and is a serious, serious problem with that video. The final issue, though, is rather more subtle. Counting dead bodies isn't directly transferable to danger. If you only look at fatalities, what you don't get to see is the near misses. And this is almost exactly the same mistake the US Air Force made in World War II. The researchers looking to up armor their planes saw where the bullet holes were in the returning aircraft. And their initial thought was, well, that's where we need to put the armor. Abraham Wald was a scientist, and his insight was that when they were looking at the planes, they were looking at the survivors. The missing data, the data they didn't have, was on the aircraft that didn't come back. But he inferred that the visible damage wasn't killing the plane. So where they didn't see any damage on those returning planes, that was likely to be the vulnerable areas where hits were actually more likely to be catastrophic. And the same applies on the road. If you're trying to understand how people get into trouble, the fatality rate only gives you a very limited chunk of the evidence. The absence of crashes doesn't prove absence of danger, but fatalities aren't actually a good measure of near misses either. It may tell you that you are seeing the few incidents where drivers don't actually manage the danger successfully, but there might be lots and lots of other drivers actually doing that successfully. So to sum up, danger isn't what happens. Danger is what could happen. Danger is what recognizing whether or not you need to do something about it. And that's a very different thought. Right, okay. Now I'm about to wrap up the show. One thing I did forget to do was to give you the shout out to my supporters for the last few days, and they are Claire, Living Martial Arts, Johan, John, and Anonymous. So thanks again for all your support. It's what keeps these shows going. Right, okay, so that's it for today. What was I going to say? There was something I was going to say, and I've completely forgotten what it was. But anyway, not to worry. Hopefully, you have enjoyed today's show. Remember, they go out usually live on Sundays, most Sundays. I'm Kevin Williams. This is Elevenses, and you can make a date to join me for the next show for another roundup of news, views, and better biking tips. And if you are out there on your ride today, make sure you stay shiny side up, and I will see you next time.